If you carry names like Doyle, Higgins, or McLaughlin, your bloodline holds a massive secret. Recent genetic studies prove these 15 iconic Irish surnames trace directly back to Viking warriors. Here is how your DNA bridges Ireland and the Norse world. Most people look at an Irish surname and see only Ireland. The Green Hills, the parish records, the Gaelic roots, and they stop there. But stop too early, and you miss something extraordinary. Because hidden inside some of the most recognizably Irish names in existence is a layer that predates the parishes, predates the English spellings, predates everything most people think of when they picture Irish ancestry. A Viking fingerprint, not a helmet, not a sword, a syllable, a sound. A personal name that sailed in with Norse settlers over 1,000 years ago and never left. This video walks you through 15 Irish surnames carrying that fingerprint, explains exactly where the Norse connection lives inside each name, and shows you how your DNA is finally making visible what the spelling always concealed. If your family carries one of these names, stay with me from beginning to end. What comes next will change how you say your own surname forever. Doyle. It feels completely Irish. It sounds completely Irish. And it is Irish, but the story underneath it reaches much further back than most Doyles ever realized. The name comes from the Irish O Dubhgail, and that Dubhgail is where everything changes. Break it apart and you get two old Irish elements, Dubh, meaning dark, and Gael, meaning foreigner. Doc foreigner. That was the specific label Irish Gaelic speakers used during the Viking Age to distinguish one group of Norse arrivals from another. The Dubhgail, the dark foreigners, were typically associated with the Danes. The Finhail, the fair foreigners, were the Norwegians. Irish communities were precise about the difference. They named what they saw. And then, something remarkable happened. That description, that historical label for a specific group of Viking outsiders, became a family identity. Generation after generation carried it forward. The memory of the Norse presence locked itself into a surname. Your DNA may show Scandinavian ancestry. Your name already did. Cotter. It looks like it could be English. It sounds like it might be occupational. A cotter was a medieval tenant farmer, and plenty of people assume that is where this name ends. It does not end there. The Irish form of Cotter reaches back through McIver, and Oitir is the Gaelic adaptation of a Norse personal name, Otter. That is the fingerprint, not a label for foreigners this time. Not a description of outsiders. An actual Viking first name, carried by actual Norse settlers, absorbed into Gaelic speech, locked into a surname, and handed down across 1,000 years without most people ever knowing what they were carrying. Think about what that means. Every Cotter who ever assumed their name was simply English, simply occupational, simply unremarkable, was walking around with a Norse personal name embedded in their identity. Ottar became Oitir. Oitir became Cotter. The spelling changed. The origin did not. Your surname is older than you thought, and it came from further away. McAuliffe, one of the most recognizably Irish names on this entire list. The Mac prefix, the flowing sound, everything about it reads Gaelic from the first syllable to the last, except the name buried inside it is not Gaelic at all. McAuliffe comes from Mac Amhalaoib, son of Amhalaoib, and Amhalaoib is the Gaelic form of Olaf. That is the connection, Olaf, one of the most iconic names in the entire Norse world. A name carried by Viking kings, Norse settlers, and Scandinavian rulers across centuries of Northern European history. That name crossed the water into Ireland, met the Gaelic naming system, and got reshaped by Irish tongues into Amlaoib. And then Mac locked it into a surname that has been passed down ever since. Most McAuliffes have never heard the name Olaf connected to their family, but it has always been there, hidden inside the Gaelic form. Preserved in the spelling, waiting for someone to break the name apart and show them what was inside. Olaf became Amlawib. Amlawib became McAuliffe. The Viking never left. Murray, Mory, two surnames that feel completely at home in Ireland. Two surnames that most people research for decades without ever suspecting they share a root, and without ever suspecting where that route leads. One major Irish pathway for both names traces back through Mac Amlawib Rua, or related Gaelic forms built around the same core. That core is Amlawib again, Olaf again. The same Norse personal name that produced McAuliffe, pushing forward through a different Gaelic branch, shaped by local pronunciation, regional spelling variation, and centuries of English record-keeping that flattened distinctions the original Gaelic preserved. This is exactly why people miss Viking roots in Irish surnames. Two completely different modern names, same Viking seed. The Norse name entered the Gaelic world, took root, and then split along different branches as communities spread, dialects shifted, and anglicization pushed the spellings further apart. Mory looks nothing like McAuliffe today. 1,000 years ago, they were drawing from the same well. Same origin, different journeys. One Norse name underneath them both. McManus. It sounds so natural in Ireland that the question almost feels unnecessary. Of course, McManus is Irish. What else would it be? But ask where the name inside it came from, and the answer surprises almost everyone. McManus comes from McManus, son of Magnus, and Magnus is the Gaelic form of Magnus, a Scandinavian personal name that spread through the Norse world with extraordinary reach. Norse kings carried it. Norse settlers carried it into communities across the British Isles and Ireland. And when those settlers embedded themselves in Irish coastal life, trading, intermarrying, raising children inside Gaelic communities, the names they carried became familiar, usable, worth passing down. Magnus did not arrive in Ireland as a foreign curiosity. It arrived through sustained contact, through generations of Norse presence along the coastline, through children born into communities where Scandinavian names were simply part of the naming world available to Irish families. Mac locked it in, the surname preserved it, and McManus has been carrying Magnus ever since without needing to announce it. McLoughlin, one of the most common surnames across Ireland, one of the most searched names in Irish genealogy, and one of the most direct Viking clues hiding in plain sight across the entire list. The name comes from McLaughlin, son of Lachlan, and Lachlan was the Gaelic word Irish speakers used for Scandinavia, specifically associated with Norway. The land of fjords, the land of lakes, the land the Norse came from. That is not a personal name inside this surname. It is a geographic identity, a directional marker, a Gaelic word that pointed north and said, "Our story touched that world." Families who carried the Lachlan name into their Mac line were preserving a connection to Norse origins or Norse contact so significant it became the identity worth passing down across generations. Every McLaughlin is carrying a surname that translates, at its root, to son of Scandinavia. Most people say that name their entire lives without knowing that, without realizing the surname itself is a compass, and the direction it points has always been north. McIver. It sits quietly on this list. No dramatic sounds, no obvious foreign shape, just another Mac surname that reads as straightforwardly Irish as any other. But the personal name locked inside it is one of the most purely Viking names on this entire list. McIver comes from Mac Iomhair, son of Iomhair, and Iomhair is the Gaelic form of Ivar, a Norse personal name carried by some of the most powerful Viking figures in the entire historical record. Ivar the Boneless, the leaders of the great heathen army, a name synonymous with Norse expansion, Norse settlement, and Norse power across the British Isles. That name crossed into Ireland, met Gaelic speech, and became Iomhair. Mac locked it into a surname, and McIver has been carrying Ivar ever since. A direct Viking name, no ambiguity, no debate, just a Norse personal name that traveled, settled, and got woven so completely into Gaelic tradition that it stopped looking foreign centuries ago. Before I show you the last part, if you've ever looked at your own results and wondered where Viking ancestry fits into your bloodline, I put it all together in a guide called Where Do You Really Come From? Link is in the description. But stay right here, because what comes next is the part most people completely miss. Toner. It looks modern. It sounds almost occupational. Nothing about the surface spelling suggests you are looking at a name with Norse roots embedded inside a Gaelic frame, but underneath the modern spelling is a much older story. Toner connects through Irish Gaelic forms to a personal name tradition tied to the Viking world in Ireland. Some scholarship links the root personal name to Norse naming traditions present in the Dublin Viking world, where Norse settlers established one of the most significant Scandinavian urban communities anywhere in the British Isles. Dublin was not a raid. It was a city, a Norse city, built, governed, and inhabited by Scandinavian settlers who raised children, built churches, and left names behind that Gaelic communities absorbed and carried forward. The personal name underneath Toner was part of that absorption. A Norse-era name that entered Gaelic usage early enough, embedded deeply enough, that Irish families built an O surname around it, descended from, carrying forward. Most Toners researching their family history look toward Ulster, toward County Derry, toward Irish records. All correct, but the name they are researching has a layer beneath all of that. And that layer came from Scandinavia, Tormey. It looks completely at home in Ireland. It sounds Gaelic from the first syllable, and it is Gaelic, but the personal name it was built around is unmistakably Norse. Tormey comes from O Tormey, descendant of Tormey, and Tormey is a Gaelic adaptation of the Old Norse personal name Thormod, often simplified in English as Thormod. Break that apart, and the Viking structure is immediately visible. Thor at the front, the Norse god embedded directly into a personal name, the way Scandinavian naming traditions so often did. Then a second element following it. Then centuries of Gaelic reshaping, smoothing the edges until Thormodr became Tormey, and Tormey became Tormey. That is the pattern this list keeps returning to. A Viking name enters the Gaelic world. Irish tongues reshape it. Irish naming tradition builds Mac or O around it. Generations pass. The spelling drifts further from the original. And eventually, you have a surname that looks completely Irish, because by every meaningful measure, it is completely Irish. But Thor was always at the front. Sigerson. It is one of the less common names on this list. But in terms of how clearly it preserves its Norse origin, it might be the most transparent example of all. Sigerson comes from O Siegfried, descendant of Siegfried. And Siegfried is the Gaelic adaptation of the Old Norse personal name Siegfried, known across wider Europe as Siegfried. A name so embedded in Norse and Germanic tradition that it appears in saga literature, in medieval epic, in the deep roots of Northern European naming culture. That name found its way into Ireland early enough to enter Gaelic usage. Irish families heard it, adopted it, built an O-line around it, and passed it forward. And this is the detail that stops most people cold. Viking influence in Ireland was not only axes and longships. It was culture. It was contact. It was names heard often enough in coastal communities, in trading settlements, in intermarried households, that Irish families chose them for their own children. Naming fashion crossed the water alongside everything else. Sigerson is the proof. Reynolds. It looks English. It sounds English. Most people researching a Reynolds line assume they are tracing an English or Anglo-Norman family into Ireland and leave the investigation there. But in Ireland, Reynolds has a Gaelic form that changes everything. Mac Ragnall, son of Ragnall. And Ragnall is the Gaelic adaptation of the Old Norse personal name Rungvaldr, a powerful Norse name carried by jarls, chieftains, and rulers across the Scandinavian world. A name that traveled with Norse settlers into Ireland, into Scotland, into the Isle of Man, embedding itself in Gaelic communities deeply enough that Irish families built maclines around it. Then, anglicization pushed it further. Ragnar became Reynolds. The Gaelic form disappeared from everyday use. The English spelling took over. And suddenly, a surname with a direct Norse personal name at its core looked indistinguishable from an English family name. That is 3 transformations: Norse to Gaelic, Gaelic to anglicized, anglicized to apparently English. And at every stage, the original name survived inside the new one. Rögnvaldur is still in there. It has always been in there. Godfrey. It reads English. It reads Norman. And in some Irish family lines, it genuinely is one or the other. But in Ireland, there is a Gaelic pathway for this name that leads somewhere older, and more specifically, Norse, than either England or Normandy. Irish forms like Gothraid and MacGothraid connect to Gothraid, a Gaelicized form of the Norse personal name, Guthroth, a name carried by figures inside Dublin's Viking dynasty, the Norse rulers who governed Ireland's most powerful Scandinavian settlement for generations. This was not peripheral Viking contact. This was the name of rulers, of men who shaped the political landscape of early medieval Ireland from a city they built and controlled. That name entered Gaelic usage at the highest level of Viking Irish society. Irish communities absorbed it, built O and Mac lines around it, passed it forward through generations, until the Gaelic form eventually gave way to the anglicized Godfrey most people recognize today. The English spelling erased the trail for most researchers, but the Norse ruler was always underneath it. Harold. It feels like it belongs to England, to Anglo-Saxon kings, to 1066 and Hastings, and the arrow that supposedly ended a dynasty. Most people who carry this name in Ireland assume the English connection is the whole story. It is not the whole story. In Ireland, Harold traces through O Harald, descendant of Harald, and Harald is the Gaelic form of the Old Norse personal name Haraldr, a name carried by Norse kings and chieftains across the entire Scandinavian world. Harald Fairhair, the rulers of Norway, the leaders of Norse settlements from Iceland to Ireland. That name entered Gaelic communities directly through Viking contact, became familiar enough for Irish families to use as a personal name, and then locked it into a surname that has been passed down ever since. The English Harold and the Irish Harold look identical today, but they arrived through different doors. The Irish version came through Gaelic, and the Gaelic version came through Norse. Most Harolds in Ireland are not carrying an English name. They are carrying a Viking name that anglicization made look English. Sweetman. It sounds English. It looks English. And the honest answer is that in Ireland, Sweetman did arrive through later settlement patterns rather than through the direct Gaelic absorption process that produced most of the names on this list. But the root personal name underneath it tells a different story. Sweetman traces back through the Middle English personal name, Sweatman, and that personal name connects to Old Norse roots. A name present in the broader Norse-influenced naming pool that shaped personal names across England, Scotland, and the British Isles during and after the Viking Age. Norse settlers did not only shape Ireland directly, they shaped the entire naming ecosystem of the islands surrounding it, and names that entered English usage through Norse influence eventually traveled into Ireland through later settlement waves. This is the detail most people miss when they think about Viking roots. The influence was not confined to direct contact. It radiated outward. It shaped the naming cultures of every population the Norse touched. And those populations carried Norse-influenced names into Ireland long after the longships stopped arriving. Sweetman looks English. The name inside it came from further north. Trant. It is the most debated name on this list, And that debate deserves honesty rather than a clean story that oversimplifies what the evidence actually shows. In Irish usage, Trant connects to Gaelicized forms sometimes represented as Trethan. And surname scholarship points toward a pre-Norman family of possible Scandinavian origin that settled along Ireland's southwest coast. Kerry, Limerick. The Atlantic shoreline, where Norse contact was sustained, where settlements embedded themselves into coastal communities, and where Scandinavian influence lingered long after the Viking Age's most dramatic chapter closed. But the origin is not pinned down the way McIver is pinned down, not documented the way McLoughlin is documented. The tradition points toward Scandinavian settlement influence. The exact pathway remains partially obscured. And that matters, because real history is not always neat. Some Viking roots in Irish surnames are crystal clear. A Norse personal name, a Gaelic adaptation, a direct documented line. Others are coastal and foggy and half-lost, exactly like the era that produced them. Trant sits in that second category. The tradition is there, the certainty is not. Both things are true. Here is what the names on this list have in common. None of them look Viking anymore. That is the point. By the time Gaelic naming tradition built Mac and O around a Norse personal name, by the time anglicization pushed the spelling further from the original, by the time generations of Irish families said the name in Irish townlands and wrote it in parish registers and carried it across the Atlantic, the Norse origin had become invisible. Olaf became McLaughlin, became McAuliffe. Ivar became Iomher, became McIver. Rungvalder became Ragnall, became Reynolds. Thormother became Tormey, became Tormey. The Viking never disappeared. It just stopped announcing itself. Your DNA is now doing what the spelling stopped doing centuries ago. It is pointing back to the origin, back to the coastline, back to the Norse settlers who embedded themselves so completely in Gaelic Ireland that their names became Irish names. So here is what I want to know. Which of these 15 surnames is in your family tree? Drop it in the comments with the county your family comes from. And if your DNA results show Scandinavian ancestry alongside an Irish surname from this list, tell me the percentage. Those are the comments that make this whole thing real.